in a friend and a colleague to talk about something awesome that's happening in our world today. And we have Michelle with her beautiful plant. Check it out. Did you name your plant?
Oh my God, I never really gave her a name. She's just my baby. Honestly,
Cute.
she became a bit of a neglected child towards the end, just because I was so anxious that I overwatered and then I underwatered and then it all got kind of burnt, but...
So for those of you who don't know, Michelle is a music and drugs journalist, and she writes a Substack newsletter called Rave New World, throws a party called Weed Rave, and after studying comparative literature at Columbia, she was the music editor over at Vice in New York until from 2014 to 2017, covering electronic music and global nightlife. And she's written for a lot of heavy hitters like LA Times, Bloomberg, New York Magazine, and her work really centers around counterculture and political autonomy through the lens of underground parties, street protests. And I have to just say, Michelle, I was reading little excerpts and stuff like that you, like the snippets and the highlights that you put on your website. And I wanted, if you don't mind, I don't know if this is embarrassing for you, but I wanted to read just some of your work because it is so luscious and beautiful. And I just think that, I don't know, I just wanted to share with people just how you write because I think it's really, really great. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So I'm going to read from the GQ article that you wrote about Jay-Z's weed lab, which I did not know about, which also cracked me up. And so here it goes. Behold, the weed industrial complex in its terrifying glory, an endless maze of tropical nurseries filled with hundreds of cannabis plants, science labs where chemists extract terpenes from glass beakers to make vape juice, and glass jars of nugs whiz down conveyor belts. Workers in lab coats and hairnets scuttle around hallways lit in eerie hues of burnt orange or blue. Some are even wearing gas masks, adding to the sterile post-apocalyptic vibe. Under the skunky floral perfume, the air smells like money. I just thought that was amazing. How did you get into actually just writing specifically around, it seems like all the topics and the people that you've written about and the subjects you've written about, you have a curatorial sense about what you even choose to write about. I think that's something that's pretty unique and what most authors and journalists are looking for. How did you get into that?
Sorry, I'm a little distracted because I realized that there's some sound issues, but, okay. So the question was, how did I start writing the way that I write?
Yeah. Or how do you get to choose the subjects and subjects matters and people that you write about? How do you get to that point where you can really make that decision, make those calls and make those decisions. Whereas a lot of writers will just write about anything that comes their way because they need to. It's really hard to be a working journalist.
Yeah, I feel you. Honestly, I think I've always just been attracted to spaces that not many people are paying attention to. So, subcultures, by definition, underneath the view of the mainstream. And I think that I've always found a lot of value in these spaces that maybe people overlook or stigmatize. So it started with raves, and I was just going to a lot of nightlife and dance music oriented events. Growing up as an international school kid, a lot of the socializing that I did was in nightclubs because we could go to nightclubs really, really young. And then once I started writing professionally, I kind of just got pulled into it sort of randomly by a friend who was working at Vice, who was we're starting a nightlife oriented channel. Would you be interested in working on this? And I was kind of wait, what? I can write about nightlife for a living? I can write about raves? That's crazy. So I kind of dove into that and then found so much meaning from writing about these spaces, specifically, I think, in really elevating the people who were doing the most interesting work, who were always, I would say, like queer people of color. And from there, like sort of became an expert on drug culture.
That's really funny.
In like a really visceral way, but also like, you know, I feel sort of vindicated now because as the sort of psychedelic and drug movement becomes more and more legitimized by research, I'm finding that a lot of the observations and knowledge that are communal in the rave scene are now being like proven with evidence, you know, through the research that this is something that has meaning beyond just pleasure.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really fun because like I was saying to you earlier, like a lot of folks that are in the event space, like we all started in nightlife. I mean, I know that I did like my very first like event that I did was like an after party for like my favorite band. And like, you know, you get paid. It was weird. It was a weird moment for me when I was like, oh, I can get paid to like do this for other people. It's pretty awesome. But the nightlife space is just like so much more inclusive. I feel like you can get away with so many like different things and everyone's just more open to trying new ways to experiment with interacting with each other, and that you just don't get in like maybe other more formal environments. But what are like some of the, you know, what are some of like...
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but like I'm still getting a really weird echo from Instagram. I'm not sure if it's like gonna work. Should we just like cut it?
Say bye to Instagram. Yeah. Hi Instagram, we love you. Find us on YouTube. We're here live.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay.
Right. Better?
Yes.
Kills. Yeah, Instagram like is a really funny thing. Like as we have been like going and doing like all these different kind of like virtual live streams across platforms, it's really weird. But like Facebook and Instagram in particular, like I feel like have like the most like they're like the least friendly with like other platforms and like restreaming than anything else, and Instagram in particular. Yeah, it's interesting like how like technology, like companies, like their choices of like integrations, like actually, you know, they work at like, I think a lot of platforms like work really hard to build certain types of communities. And then like now, like with everybody like going online, like all at once, and like we all have like multiple, you know, like we all have multiple platforms that we are members of. Like I have Instagram, I have TikTok, I have YouTube, I have like all these things. And the reality is that like, you know, sometimes I want to receive one content on one platform and another content on the other platform. And as content creators, we want to distribute it to all of the platforms, and we want like easy ways to do that, right? But if the technology doesn't open it up, then we can't get the access. It makes it difficult.
Yeah.
So anyways, I was just wondering like what kind of like, are you still like very much in the nightlife scene, or like what's happened since like coronavirus and the pandemic? There were like all these like underground, like illegal sort of like spaces, but like that definitely we met doing and planning like, sort of like a virtual like event for the masses, right? And like I thought it was like really interesting to sort of think about how do you take like a nightlife experience and bring that into a digital space. But now that things are like opening up, it must be like heaven sent again.
Yeah. Well, over the last year, I definitely like everyone else, like have been really missing nightlife. I will say though that over the summer, I did go to a lot of protests and some illegal parties that were happening in like, you know, forests and parks outdoors. And both of those sorts of phenomenons became my beat for a while. So I was really interested in how protests were maybe funneling some of the like energy that would typically be vented through nightlife, but was kind of being channeled into the streets, and what that kind of meant about Gen Z and how that's shaping, you know, new political culture. And then I also threw a bunch of virtual events for the first time. both for my own sort of community and then working with a cannabis brand to sort of produce an event for them. So super interesting experiences. My first event got Zoom bombed.
It actually happened to you. It's like everybody worries about it. What happened?
These alt-right people just crashed the room, and it was so funny because I had specifically set up like a whole barrier to entry with like a door girl, like screening people and stuff, but they still managed to come in. It was kind of disorienting. But I kind of like, not happy, but I appreciate the experience because now I understand like how that feels and how it feels extremely invasive. And it really actually literally feels like someone like came into your space, you know, even though it was, like, cool, it felt so visceral, so physical in a way. But what I really enjoy about virtual events, and this might be really obvious, but it's that the community that you create is global. And I am very interested in like global scenes. I think cannabis and nightlife are both global stories. So to like have different perspectives beyond like, you know, California, LA weed culture join is always super refreshing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I moved to Taiwan like during the pandemic, right? And like one of the first things that like we did was like, we're like, oh my gosh, like where there's no COVID is like we went to the clubs, right? And it was like really interesting to me because like I feel like it is such a global thing because you feel like you're at home kind of, you know, even though you're in like we were like totally in a different country, but just there's customs and like ways to like sort of like hang out and dance and greet people that are like the same everywhere that you go. And there's just, I don't know, just this love of music that connects everyone and like this openness that, it has been incredibly like grounding for me just to go out, you know, as I've been like transitioning into this like new space. But you moved from Singapore to America, and like Singapore is like has a lot of like rules and regulations. We looked into going to Singapore and we're like, oh no, we're gonna go to Taiwan. It's a little bit more chill there. Like, how is it? But how do you think about it? Like, I'm curious, going from like Singapore to, you know, the States.
In terms of like drugs or lifestyle?
In terms of just like, you know, underground culture and like nightlife, is it the same? Like, do you feel like the same? Like, I was wondering if like maybe like in Taiwan, that Taiwan and the US have like such a strong relationship. Like if like that was why I felt like more, you know, at ease or at home, or is there truly like a sort of a what's up, like a known global like culture around like music and nightlife? Like customs.
Definitely like Asia is having a really exciting moment for dance music right now. I think some of the most interesting rave oriented techno is coming out of like places like Shanghai. And I think that like what's cool about Asia right now is that there's like a Asian ecosystem that's forming that's outside of the American European dialogue. So all of these like Asian promoters and DJs play each other's parties and clubs, and they're creating their own scenes and their own sounds. I think that there's definitely like subculture in Asia as well, especially in places where they're like really authoritarian regimes. I feel like there's more at stake when you throw a party. Like here in America, even though obviously like there is more oppressions than I can count, you're still like not really like in danger if you throw like a gay party in New York or something. But in a place like China or Singapore where, you know, being gay is actually illegal, I do feel like there is a heightened risk, and that risk creates like a completely different energy.
And that's like so sad because I feel like Yeah, I feel like the ability to like express yourself like in a nightclub like is part of what makes the nightclub fun, you know. I was actually like in a club in Taipei and they like the lights went on, like DJ, like the music stopped and it was like the police came in and I was like, oh my God, did someone like get shot? And I was just like freaking out, like looking for the exit. And like it's so different here where they're not afraid of the police people out here. And they're like, oh no, they're just coming to like check for COVID, like just to check, like make sure you have your IDs. And like some guy like actually said to me that he feels safer that the cops are doing that. And I was like, no, this is like not a good user experience at all.
Wait, what do you mean they were trying to check for COVID?
Well, because like they, because this club is, they're checking to like, just checking IDs to make sure for contact tracing is really big out here. So they're just checking to make sure that like everybody that's in that club, like they have their IDs so they can contact trace in case COVID happens.
That sounds like an excuse just to surveil people.
That's what I thought too. But but it's like we come from a totally different culture in America, right? Where it's like underground means underground, you know? And like you don't like, I think like a lot of people don't even like use their real names or like they dress totally different. And that's part of like what makes, and again, is like, that's part of like what makes like people be more open and it also makes things more acceptable. Like that's how like new, like to me, that's like how new social interactions get formed is when you aren't having to conform to a certain way of like interacting with each other. And when your identity isn't there. It's really funny. Like sometimes people, like at least in like event spaces or like when like we're doing like interviews with folks, they're always like talking like about authenticity. And I was like reading your article that you did with Grimes and it's like in her digital like avatar, a war nymph. And I think that's really interesting how, I don't know if you think the same way, but I was just thinking that maybe like actually being authentic isn't really the goal right now in the future. Like having like a really fully formed like digital version of yourself like is more important than like showing like your realness. I'm just wondering like how you feel about that.
Well, it's funny because I don't even know what authentic really means. It means so many different things to different people. Like I would argue that Grimes having a war nymph is authentic to herself. Like, I think Grimes is super popular because people get a sense that she's authentic, but like authentic doesn't need to be like physically in your body. Like you can be authentic virtually as well. So I don't know. I think that authenticity is so easily commodified, like by people, you know, building brands online for themselves. Like creators and influencers are basically like, you know, marketing this idea of authenticity. And I think because of that, people have become like so hypersensitive to like their authenticity radar. That like authenticity for personal brands is like the new like advertising and marketing for like, you know, corporate brands. Like people are so aware of when they're being marketed to. Through the lens of authenticity. But yeah, I don't know. I'm really interested in the work that you're doing, like throwing events virtually and like how that kind of dovetails into the authenticity conversation. Like obviously we know when an event is like being real and when it's just like a PR stunt, but does it go deeper than that?
I mean, events, I think at least to me, like the function of a good event is basically just a specific time and place where people can connect with each other in a way where they couldn't have done it otherwise, where you need more of a critical mass than of one or two to be able to like change your sort of outlook on the world. You know, I think that virtual events has become this really interesting, like interactive, like a new interactive media it's like still very much like early days, but like I think about how Netflix, right? Netflix is just content distribution, like film, like canned content distributed. And they did this, they tried something like earlier last year where there was like this quiz show thing, and you can like do a choose your own adventure with this film. And like, it was really a strange like experience, where they're trying to make an interactive media, but actually like live streams and people just simply like chatting, liking, like commenting, joining in on a conversation is actually media that has now become fully interactive. And I think that we're still at the very beginnings of like seeing how does like events are like curated, a lot of times curated communities. So how can we like actually take these and it's like move past the technology that we have and keep pushing technology forward so that like our events and our ideas and our interactions with each other can be something that is actually like revolutionary, and does actually shift and change culture. Right now, I still think that a lot of things with virtual events we're still very much like confined to the constraints of the technology that we have today.
So, like, what could change to make it revolutionary?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things is like we have to like, we're like very much like 2D, right? So I do think that like actually people being able to create and build environments that others can like walk in is something that would really change the game. Like when you go to a part of what being like at a rave or at an event that makes it so special is like being in this like sort of physical environment and having more than one space to like go and move and interact and have an experience with somebody else. And I think that there's a lot of, for instance, like I talk, then you talk, right? So just like technology and like audio and how that works, like has to get opened up in order for us to like feel like more, able to listen and also more comfortable to talk.
So like VR basically.
Kind of, but I don't want to wear a headset. I mean, I don't know about you, but it just seems like really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to imagine how else you could allow people to be mobile while still in a virtual world. I've heard of friends like designing VR versions of clubs, like IRL clubs, like Berghain, where they just like recreate the entire inside and you can party inside.
Yeah. And like, I mean, I think also like the avatar, like it's actually like, just being able to see yourself, like versus like having to be some weird like avatar, that's also something that like literally like computer, like video processing power, it's really hard to do that, if not like damn near impossible to do that for more than a handful of people. So you can't actually physically show up, like, even if it's in a digital way, like you can't show up unless you're like a cartoon essentially. And that kind of sucks. So that makes it like, that in a way where you are stepping into like a costume, which in some contexts is perfectly fine. Right. But not in all. Definitely not in all of them.
Are there platforms that you're excited about for throwing virtual events that aren't Zoom?
Yeah. I was just looking at one today called Nowhere. I don't know if you've seen this, but like it's getting there. It's like has like a 3D environment. And it has like people's videos instead of avatars, and you can like, move around it. But like that has a limitation of like 25 people, that can be in any like one room at one time. So it's like still small. And I think one of the more successful applications of virtual has been when you've got like 20,000 plus like people happening like at a time.
Interesting.
Would you? I'm like one of my friends, Trent. He goes happily Neuralink. Just curious, like what your take is like on Neuralink and like this idea of like uploading basically a chip into your brain and connecting with people that way.
Oh my God, are you really gonna make me comment on Elon Musk? I don't know. It sounds really cool if you can pull it off.
Would you do it?
Yeah, I guess I'd rather have Elon in my brain than Bill Gates.
I think it would be interesting. I think it would be interesting to be able to like, basically it's like it's like kind of mediated telepathy, right? Like being able to do that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It kind of like get weird, like thinking of like what's in my brain that's like in my subconscious that I'm not even like aware of, and then that like manifests itself into like other people's ideas. All right. So you mentioned something about like post-alcohol spaces, and I just want to touch on that, a little bit before we leave, and just tell people what like a post-alcohol space is like, to you, and like how you are working towards like making that happen.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the long story is that 2 years ago, I wrote an essay called Cali Sober that went super viral. And the term basically refers to a drug diet of psychedelics and cannabis, no alcohol. And I was using that term a lot at parties where I was going to a lot of like weed events and there wasn't really alcohol present. And it felt like something genuinely new. Because even though, of course, cannabis is like present at a lot of parties in California, to have it so intentionally be around, specifically like psychedelic and I consider cannabis a psychedelic too. These kinds of like mind expansive drugs in a social context, I think it creates something very, very different from like an alcohol-based party. So I became really interested in like creating spaces around psychedelics, and I started throwing my own party called Weed Rave, where we would bring in like a lot of really interesting brands that I liked in the space, and then combine sort of the worlds of cannabis and nightlife together. And it was sort of a social experiment to me because a lot of people were very scared of the idea. And I got a lot of like really anxious like questions like, oh, like, am I just gonna like freak out? Like, what's gonna happen? And I was like, well, we're all kind of in this interesting transition space right now as weed becomes more legal and we can smoke outdoors in public, like socially, in big groups, so we're all going to be doing this anyway. Why not do it intentionally and move together as a community and support each other as we kind of like learn how to socialize around weed? And now, I mean, maybe I shouldn't talk about this publicly, but who cares? I'm very interested in throwing in shroom parties because they're also definitely a thing that's starting to happen now that cannabis is very mainstream in California, and I'm noticing a lot more underground spaces oriented towards shrooms. So that's almost like even more mind-boggling and unfathomable to some people, like tripping together, like what? But actually,
tripping with strangers, I think, is my thing, like, or like a large crowd on shrooms, like, I don't know, like it would have to be like highly curated, I think, for me to really opt in.
Yes, and I think actually that jives with the future of events. For me, post-pandemic, I feel like I have a lot of predictions of how nightlife is going to come roaring back. Obviously, there are going to be like these massive parties with like 20,000 people or whatever, but I also think there's going to be a lot of interest in these like more intimate gatherings of, still very private, kind of like what people have been doing throughout the pandemic, really.
Mm-hmm.
And maintaining this kind of vibe because of how crazy shit's gonna get. So definitely I agree with you that feelings of safety and comfort are like paramount when it comes to psychedelic parties, and that applies to everything from the crowd curation to the physical environment and the aesthetics of what you're doing.
Well, I think that's great, and I hope that a lot of those like spaces emerge for folks because and it's AAPI month, but also Mental Health Awareness Month. Is that I think that there's almost this like pressure socially to like go out and like be back to normal, you know, or like I've been inside for so long, like let's party. But, you know, that like that it doesn't have to be that way. Like we're not going back to anything. We just like keep marching into the future. And whatever your like body feels like or your mental state like feels like, you should be, you know, you should honor that. And like you don't have to go to some crazy party and like get drunk, like just to feel like you're alive again and like out of this pandemic, right? So
totally. I think there is a sort of pressure to perform happiness and just like party vibes right now. And some people, especially those who are sober, are going to feel like they're not living up to expectations. And I really resist that. I think that we need to be very, very careful and intentional about the way that we re-enter these spaces. Our bodies are not used to partying on that level. Our drug tolerances might be off. Like also drugs can kind of take effect differently depending on the circumstance. Like your tolerance can actually go down when you're like in a different environment. So like it's why like if you have 2 drinks sometimes at a bar, like you can get wasted, but if you have 2 drinks at home, like you're fine. Like it can really depend on a lot of different things. So I really think that people need to be very careful actually about re-entering the world, because I already know people that have gotten really hurt from not watching out.
Yeah, it's important to stay safe. Well, I heard that maybe you might be having a party tonight, so I want to let you go and prepare for that. It sounds exciting.
Yes, I hope that I can pull it off. It's such a spur of the moment thing, but sometimes I feel like happenings are the best types of parties where you call on your community to come together and you kind of see what happens.
Yeah, no, it's the best. I love it when someone's like, this place is going off now. And it's like left field. It's like, that's always where all the magic happens. So thanks for coming, Michelle. It was great to chat with you and hope you have a wonderful day.
Sarah. So nice to, get into your mind too.
Yeah, it's good to connect. See you later.
Bye.